Devil Cult Leader, featuring Manson Family Cult Leader Charles Manson. Full name Charles Miles Maddox Manson. Crimes and Sprees. Charles was known to be one of the most notorious cult leaders who orchestrated the Tate LaBianca murders. In addition, he created a communal cult dubbed the Manson Family. The cult involved a series of break-ins, along with murders and stabbings, which led to 9 lives being taken. He was not the person who committed the murder itself, rather he was the mastermind behind the murders. Also, he was known to be in the role of orchestrating the plannings of the murders, then would manipulate young individuals into committing the crimes for him. It was reported he would feed drugs such as LSD and intense pills to his followers in order for them to listen and follow the murders. Charles would target the specific location on California, specifically the 10150 Cielo Drive home, due to the fact it had represented a sense of hate towards a Hollywood elite whom he and his team rejected his music in the past. He knew the house layout due to the fact he had occasionally visited the place to specifically meet with a former tenant and producer, Terry Melcher. Charles ordered certain people to go inside the flat and murder everyone inside, which was a success. His cult members would reportedly murder and brutally stab the family inside the house over 160 times. In addition, they were seemingly enjoying and laughing during the murders. One of the victims included a newborn child that wasn't even born yet, tragically. After the murders had occurred, Charles would break into the window to do some sort of swan dive to get inside the house, then would write ritualistic symbols along with messages using the victim's blood. Though most of the time he would order his members to write down the bloody messages instead. Investigation. The investigation for the case of Charles, along with the Manson family, was heavily unstructured, uncoordinated, in other words, it was full of panic. During the search for the murder of Tate LaBianca family, the LAPD would arrest an innocent teenager, in other words, accusing the teenager for the wrong crime, meaning he did not commit the murders. Before the murder of Tate LaBianca, a music teacher named Gary Hinman was murdered, which led to an investigation from the LASO. In fact, the LASO had arrested a member of the Manson family, Bobby Biausole. However, the LAPD would reject the files in a way dismissing as a coincidence. There was a separate investigation, also a raid in Death Valley. It was not to look for the murderers or the cult. It was to catch a group of vagrants for grand theft auto and arson after they torched a piece of earth-moving equipment. During the raid, the officers had arrested 24 people, including Charles Manson. The police did not have any idea they had arrested the most wanted cult leader at the time. In LA jailhouse, a member of the Manson family, Susan Atkins, without arrogance, she began to confess the murders without any remorse. Investigation, Part 2. The inmates who listened to the confession with a horrified demeanor, they would report it to the police guards. The LAPD would finally hold each and one of the Manson family members in custody, though there was an issue. They needed to find physical evidence, specifically the weapons they used to murder the victims. Months later, one day on September 1, 1969, a 10-year-old boy had discovered a .22 caliber high standard Longhorn revolver under a bush near his home. He would then show his parents with an innocent facade, which eventually led to the hands of LAPD, which was then proven that with that weapon the Manson family had used it to execute their victims. Members from the cult began to confess about their crimes, leading to an official and final arrest after unfortunate failure within the investigation. Manson family members. Charles Tex Watson was Charles Manson's right-hand man, basically like an assistant. Susan Atkins, a follower who confessed, really in a way a snitch, in the eyes of Charles Manson. Patricia Krenwinkel was actually one of the active killer who apparently served the longest serving in California as a female inmate. Leslie Van Houten, she spent 53 years in prison before being paroled and is a follower of Charles Manson. Linda Kasabian, a lookout driver during the murders. In other words, like a security guard who looked out to see if the police would catch on or not. Lynette Squeaky Fromme was a loyal member who did not kill in 1969, but later attempted to assassinate President Gerald Ford for talking bad about Charles Manson. Mary Brunner, she is one of the first members of the Manson family, and was one of the murderers for music teacher Gary Hinman. Bobby Bialso, an associate who stabbed music teacher Gary Hinman. In other words, he was also one of the murderers for music teacher Gary Hinman. Manson family members, Part 2. Sandra Good. She was one of another most loyal members for Charles Manson. In addition, when she served in prison time, she would send taunting letters to the police and executives. Steve Clem Grogan. He was one of the murderers for the LaBianca family murders, but he would eventually confess later, along with Susan Atkins. Bruce Davis was one of the high-ranking cult member who remains incarcerated for his role in both the Gary Hinman murders and Shea murders. Trial and court proceedings. People would confuse whether the court proceedings and the trial was an actual court case or a circus customly made for Charles Manson. Charles would show up in the court with a Nazi symbol on his head. He was not the only one though. All his members began to follow his lead and then paint a Nazi symbol on their forehead. The female members of the family of Manson, in other words, Manson family, would show up smiling, holding hands despite being on handcuffs, and singing highly inappropriate songs or rhythms. Other than inappropriate songs, they would sing music Charles had made. In one of the trials, Charles would do a swan dive towards the judge, identical to the jump Deobra Redden had committed in Clark County District, Nevada Court towards Mary Kay Holthus. Judge Mary Kay Holthus. Apologies. During that time, even the America's president, Richard Nixon, had ordered the court to declare Charles as guilty, even if it's not directly. There was a sudden disappearance from attorney Ronald Hughes. It was known Ronald was heavily against Charles during the court. In addition, he was found murdered, which created a speculation that the Manson family, even if in custody, they somehow executed Ronald for the defiant comments against their leader, Charles Manson. Trial and court proceedings. Before the sentence, there were many occasions in both the courtroom and during the interviews, Charles would dance on top of the jury's table or the defense table. It was reported he would somehow balance himself with his head as he spun around like a helicopter. He would even massage the shoulders of one of the interviewers. On January 25, 1971, the jury sentenced Charles, along with his family, to the death penalty into the gas chamber. However, that would be taken away due to the temporary suspension towards the death penalty in California. Therefore, instead of the death penalty, the members would be life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Childhood. The childhood of Charles was structured with extreme neglect, instability, institutionalization, and severe emotional abuse. When he was born, for months he did not have a proper first name, which led him to be named no-name Maddox. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was a severe alcoholic, had a dangerous level of addiction towards beverages containing alcohol. The level went beyond that it escalated to his mother selling Charles to a waitress for one can of beer. That led to his uncle having to track down the waitress, later retrieving Charles back. The same uncle and his mother got arrested for robbery, leading Charles to having to stay with another uncle, along with an aunt that lived together. They were both abusive. In addition, it was reported they made Charles wear a pink dress to the first day of his grade in school. When his mother got released from prison, she would reject taking care of Charles. In addition, she would leave him alone for weeks or place him under the care of foster care. Childhood, Part 2. When Charles turned 12 years old, his mother made a permanent decision in giving him up, which led to Charles getting sent to Catholic school in Terre Haute, Indiana. 10 months later, he would escape from the facility, attempting to go back to his mother's care. However, his mother reportedly would furiously reject Charles, then send him back, as if he threw him in the trash. At age 13, he would become homeless, get forced to live in the streets as he began to commit theft along with other crimes. He would use his first gun at age 14. During school, he would sexually assault older inmates actually, that are larger than him. He would make a final escape from Indiana, then steal a car with another inmate. With that vehicle, he would drive to Texas, along with committing a large amount of robberies. Due to his offenses, he was first sent to Virginia, however would soon be transferred to a prison in Washington, D.C. state. From the staff members there, it was reported Charles was heavily violent, socially unacceptable, and dangerous. Charles began to learn the human psychology mind, then used that to manipulate others into protecting him, also joining his cult. Overall, his childhood was very unstable, unstructured, and emotionally abusive. Personal life, potentially affecting their crimes and acts. After he went through his childhood years, turning age 19, Charles would marry a hospital waitress named Rosalie Willis. They had a son together, Charles Manson Jr. They lived in California during the marriage, though even after getting married, Charles would return to a life of crime. Rosalie would get tired of the imprisonment, leading to the divorce between them. After being released in 1958, he would have a second marriage with a female who goes by Leona Candy Stevens. Another child was then born, who went by Charles Luther Manson, though Charles once again was sent to prison immediately after the marriage in McNally Island Penitentiary in Washington state. An inmate then began to teach Charles the life of music, leading to an obsession with the musical industry. He would continue to grow his musical skills, swearing he would become a large musician, even larger than the Beatles. After being released from prison, Charles began to feel fear and feel hate towards the real world. He would even say prison is his home, his real home. He would then use a psychological manipulation he learned in prison, then use it to pick the members for his newly created cult after he was released. Pivotal events. Charles Miles Maddox Manson was born on November 12, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. On 1939, Charles's mother was sent to 5 years in prison for robbery. On 1947, age 12, his mother would abandon Charles, then send him to Gibault School for Boys in Indiana. On 1948, at age 13, Charles committed his first documented federal crime. On 1951, Charles was sent from Virginia to Washington, D.C. prison for slashing an inmate with a razor blade. On January of 1955, Charles had his first marriage with Rosalie John Willis. On 1959, Charles has his second marriage with Leona Candy Stevens. From 1961 to 1967 in prison, Charles began to learn about music. On April of 1967 in San Francisco, California, Charles makes his first follower for his cult. From August 8 to 10, 1969, the murder of Tate LaBianca home murders occur. On October of 1969, Charles and his gang was arrested. On 1971, January 25, Charles was found guilty with first-degree murders, leading to him being sentenced to San Quentin prison. Quotes from Charles Miles Maddox Manson. Look down at me and you see a fool. Look up at me and you see God. Look straight at me and you see yourself. You know, a long time ago being crazy meant something. Nowadays everybody's crazy. Nobody. I'm a nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And straight I'd raise it if you get too close to me. You expect to break me? Impossible. You broke me years ago. You killed me years ago. Prison doesn't begin and end at a gate. Prison is in the mind. These children that come at you with knives, they are your children. You taught them. I didn't teach them. I just tried to help them stand up. Maybe I should have killed 400 to 500 people. Pornography? I've been looking at it all my life and it hasn't affected me anything. Bundy's a poop butt. Bundy's a rumpkin. Bundy's a mama's boy. I cannot stand him. Forensic inferences. Charles's psychological perspective and mind was heavily characterized by his childhood, personal life, and the negatives that occurred in his life. In his mind, as his childhood passed, due to the fact he received too much neglect, and even became homeless for it, he began to think he wants to be known for something. He wants to have some sort of attention, whether if it was not positive or negative, was positive or negative. In addition, he did not receive the proper education. However, during his first prison life, while at first he might have wanted to leave, it's likely he began to adjust into the life of crimes, isolation, prison, and manipulation. Speaking of manipulation, he began to learn the skill, which led him to finding a use into manipulating others to him, which led to the cult being formed in a way. He likely felt a sense of pride and strength, especially seeing there were so many people looking up to him. He may have appreciated his followers. However, it's likely his sense of desire to control and commit the crimes was stronger. At the time, he had hatred towards someone who rejected him, which made and created a combination of desire, hate, and dangerous pride. Also maybe potentially envy. A hazardous combination, really. Especially from the endless crime spree and adjustments he made into the negative. He may have felt annoyed when his members had confessed. However, he couldn't care less. In fact, in his mind, he likely found the court as a circus rather than a place to be scared or feared for a sentence. In other words, he did not care whether if he would get sentenced to death or not. Overall, there were many combinations of factors in his life that led to the mind of Charles had. Legacy and impact. The case of Charles Miles Maddox Manson, Charles Manson, became America's most popular cult case. Society noticed the dark side in music and its background. California began to upgrade their homes and locks, though there were others who ignored it and got murdered by another serial killer known as the LA Stalker. In addition, some of those people did not watch their children well. That's why one of the first victims of the Night Stalker was a child. Anyways, musicians and producers began to hide and keep their addresses private and home locations private. Some musicians got inspired by the music of Charles Manson. Films were inspired by the case of Charles, which included series such as the Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time Hollywood 2019 and the Netflix psychological thriller Mindhunter. While other individuals can succeed regardless of their childhood, till this day, individuals seem to not learn the effects on bad childhood, and they would even bully others for it.